What really pushed you to come and join Web3?
When I started to really look into the Web3 space, I realized that it was definitely a paradigm shift, something that would be as big as the invention of the internet.
There are a lot of scam situation can also happen, and
Yeah.
your reputation is also will be on the stake always, right?
What's important is making sure that the founders are aware that they might have competition, and then what's their value proposition.
What do you think that shift is going to make happen into the industry, specifically talking about India?
There's the element around composability and permissionless. Means that you don't need to go on call. You just sit on your computer and you just do it.
What should be the starting point before even entering Web3? Hey, Bury, thank you so much for joining us today. I don't have to say a lot. So LongHash Ventures, which you have written in your bio, it is something which tells a lot into the Web3 space. But since we are into the POB episode, which is basically means like proof of builders, and I personally believe not only I, my entire Web3 community believes everyone whosoever does anything for the Web3 are the builders. It doesn't matter if they are writing single line of a code or not. So thank you so much, Bury, for again joining us. Before we kick off the session, there is a few things which I just wanted to like understand from you first, and then we'll go and follow on the entire question. So first thing first is like, please introduce yourself. The one thing which we want to hear about you is like, what really pushed you to come and join Web3? That is one thing. What was the Euro commitment and that transition journey of yours? And then we will kick it off the entire discussion from there on.
Yeah, perfect. Awesome. No, that sounds great. So thanks, Prashant, so much for having me on. I'm very excited to join this session and very excited that you consider me as a builder. Yeah, so I mean, I'll give a quick intro and I'll share my journey from the non-Web3 world into the Web3 world. And maybe I'll actually start in chronological order. I mean, my background is I spent my early career in the mining industry, and for most people in Web3, it's like, oh, Bitcoin mining. It's like, no, the actual digging dirt out of the ground type of mining and doing metals and commodities sales and trading in Southeast Asia and China. And then I went through a lot of different, kind of career reinventions. I was a consultant as well for some time. And actually, just before Web3, I was a consultant with Digital McKinsey in Southeast Asia. And so we were doing a lot of digital transformations in the region. We were working with a lot of legacy businesses, banks, insurance companies, industrial companies, et cetera, that were looking for ways to, upgrade their technology stack, to leverage, new technologies, et cetera. And, it was interesting work because it felt like it was, cutting edge, right? But of course, the feeling and the reality was definitely very different. And around the time of DeFi summer, well, I had actually heard about Bitcoin since like around 2012, and I didn't pay much attention. And so around the time of DeFi summer, I really started to pay a lot of attention into Web3. And of course, at that time, DeFi was like the almost like the only thing that most people were talking about. And I remember I took some time off from my job, took about 2-3 months off to understand what this was about, to use some of these applications and these protocols and just kind of play around with it and understand what were some of the benefits and what this new technology could do. And I think one of the things that really struck me was that, I was able to compare the potential of Web3 versus the potential of a lot of the, kind of incremental technologies that I was working on with clients when I was a consultant. And I always like to joke, I like to say that, all these digital transformations, especially at the banks, it's just lipstick on a pig, right? It's not really moving the needle, and it's not a paradigm shift. And I think when I started to really look into the Web3 space, I realized that it was definitely a paradigm shift, something that would be as big as the invention of the internet or as big as, the printing press or maybe even bigger than those two. And I just felt this calling. I just felt like I need to be in this space, right? I'm not the earliest, but I know I'm still early and I want to be part of this. And I left consulting. I was lucky that our two partners are ex McKinsey and it's one of those things where you ask around like, hey, do you know anyone in this space? And they'll say, oh, there's a couple of people, and you should talk to them. And so I ended up joining LongHash Ventures initially as a consultant, funny enough, and I was helping out with on the accelerator side. I was helping with one of the cohorts with the teams on basically how to tell a story about, what is it that they're building? What does their technology do? What does it help solve? And it was a great way to learn about Web3, right? Because even for me, I had to ask a lot of basic questions around like, okay, what does the technology do? What problem are you solving? And how can we actually tell this in a compelling way to investors, users, and partners? And it was one of those things that I kind of planned to do for a few months and then kind of figure out where to go from there and decide if I wanted to be, a founder or a service provider or something else. And one thing led to another. I ended up getting extremely busy at LongHash. And then, after some time, I had been there for 4 or 5 months. And I said, well, maybe we should make this official and I should become an employee. And that's what ended up happening.
Awesome. I believe there are a few things which I have taken during our discussion, right, as a note, which really speaks about the ethos of the Web3 also, right, where it doesn't matter if you have been doing the coal mining or if you have been doing water mining. The only intent of yours was is to just join the Web3 and seeing the entire inclusion of money, which I call it, right? So in real
Yep.
term, and you pointed it very rightly, right? So when we talk about the banks and everyone, it's like, so everyone is just talking about, I don't know, like why they don't even talk about all of these inclusion. Maybe because they are the mediators.
Mm,
If they start talking about all of these things, then they will start losing the money and there won't be any more money
exactly.
playing around in the streets.
Mm,
Before I dive into that area, right? So if you can also walk us about like what LongHash is currently doing, like what you guys
yeah.
are doing at the LongHash.
Yeah. Happy to introduce LongHash Ventures as well. So we were started about 5 years ago by our two partners. As I mentioned, they were also doing digital transformations in Southeast Asia as consultants. They had been investing in crypto, on a personal level for a few years. I mean, back in around 2015, 2016. And I think that, they also had a very strong belief in some of the philosophical aspects, right? Some of the aspects around, self-sovereignty, decentralization, democratizing access to, financial services and beyond, right? And also realizing that this was an emerging technology that had the power to disrupt a lot of, aspects of our life. And so at that time, they decided to leave their corporate jobs and start LongHash Ventures. They saw a white space particularly in Asia, where nobody was doing venture building. So there were no accelerators, there were no incubators, and nobody was really helping early stage founders take their concepts and ideas into a startup, and a sustainable business. And so they started LongHash Ventures as one of the first global Web3 accelerators and the first one in Asia. And over the years, we've been running our accelerator now for 5 years. We have done 10 cohorts. We also pioneered the partnership at the beginning back in 2018. This was way before DeFi, way before, most people knew what NFTs were. And so a lot of the use cases were quite eclectic and of course, it was also very chain agnostic at the time. But in 2019, we came across Polkadot. We invested into that ecosystem pretty early because we were strong believers of a multi-chain world. And we run the first global Polkadot accelerator. And that led us to our current model on the accelerator side, which we call LongHash X, where we partner with various ecosystem partners to run these cohorts. And so we did Polkadot in 2019. We launched the first Filecoin accelerator. I believe it was around late 2020. We've been working with Filecoin all these years. We just kicked off one with Axelar about a month ago. And so that's basically how we tend to run it. We tend to, have a strong ecosystem partner that brings a lot of this technical capabilities and knowledge. And then, we bring more of the strategy and business side. And of course, our value proposition, to the projects is that you have, kind of both the technical and business side of things. And then to the partners that we can help to build their developer ecosystem and communities, right? And then around DeFi summer, maybe a few months after, we also decided to launch funds. So we launched our first fund, which was a DeFi focused fund. And then we launched our second fund around August of last year. So about 6 months ago, which is a more broader Web3 focused fund. It's very much focused on infrastructure. So making investments, kind of across the whole infrastructure stack, anywhere from, L1s to scaling solutions to interoperability solutions and middleware. And so now we're at this, unique position where, we have the venture funds, but then we also have the accelerator. It's a very interesting match where we invest into protocols and ecosystems on the fund. And then through the accelerator, we can help to build their developer ecosystems and also help to build, the applications that will go on top of these protocols.
I believe that is amazing, right? So what you guys have been doing, I have been following your work for a very longer time now, and I believe we already met in multiple, like in Singapore as well. We spoke highly about all of those areas, and that is the place when you joined, right? So one of the intro of that, like, doesn't matter if you are coding or not, but
Mm,
ultimately you guys are placing the right application on the right chain so that the adoption can kick in, and that is when the entire Web3 is going to see the adoption cycle, like that, which I call it as a adoption wheel. The moment you start kicking that in, then wheel will start rotating, and the moment it starts rotating, that it will have inertia to take it forward. So thank you so much for adding that, and keep on doing what you guys are doing at LongHash. But again, coming back to our session again, there are a few more things which is going to put you into a tough spot now, and I'll make sure, like, I'll put you into those spots. One of the points which you have mentioned during my second question was like you were talking about the DeFi inclusion and all of those things, right? We all
mm,
have seen many things happening in the space, right? When I say many things in terms of DeFi and the money side,
mm.
and I believe we all agree on one point is something called legal tender as a DeFi, right? And
Yeah.
not everyone speaks about it very highly about it. It's like the
Mm,
moment you start speaking about it, people start thinking like, hey, you know what? You might be talking about against the decentralization ethos, where I can be a terrorist and I must be able to send my money anywhere in the world, and I should be
mm,
able to operate it, right? But for me, like personally speaking, in my opinion, I personally in a favor of, like, the law should come into the picture, governing law should come into the picture, but the law should not touch the human person directly, right? In terms of that,
mm,
let's say it should be able to identify if this money is used for what. If that has been identified, then it is fine. As per you have been building into this space, you have been seeing the startups be building into this space as well. What have you seen so far, the reactions of the government? The second thing is, like, when we talk about inclusion, does that inclusion also comes with the cost of bringing terrorism also in the money side? Is that so?
Tough questions. No, I think to the your first point around, you can call it the risk or the anticipation of regulation, right? I think that number one, we've seen various jurisdictions around the world take different approaches, right, to this, and some have signaled a strong openness to, let's call it, the blockchain slash Web3 world, right? And then there's others where it's been a very clear message that it's not a very, maybe it's a little bit less welcome or frowned upon, right? And there's a lot of nuance to this, right? I mean, in some places, I think that some governments see that there's a lot of potential in the technology, but at the same time, they're conscious that there's also a lot of risk, especially for what is usually referred to as the retail users, right? And I think 2022 was an exceptional year, given everything that happened, in May, in June, in November, and in months in between. And I think that it's no surprise that a lot of governments are looking into this in more detail. I think from a founder's perspective, I mean, there's certainly a lot of questions around what does it mean for them, just generally as being a founder in the Web3 space. Sometimes there's also more detailed questions in terms of, where should I incorporate? What is a jurisdiction that will be friendly to genuine builders to come in and develop this technology and develop the use cases that actually bring a lot of value to people and corporations and governments, etc. I think, of course, one of the challenges in with governments is always that regulation is usually not as quick to understand new technologies as most people would like them to be, right? And so there's always the risk that there'll be some overreactions or so, right? But it's one of those things where it's early to tell, and I guess we'll need to see over the next coming years what happens, especially out of places like the US or so, where obviously there's a lot of builders. Places like India, where there's also a lot of builders, and then some of the other hubs like Dubai and Singapore. I think we need to see, but probably something will happen in the next 2-3 years. But hopefully also something that makes it a little bit clearer to builders on, okay, what does the law permit, what does it not permit, and then what are some of the requirements, right? I think that if you look today, let's say in the DeFi space, in most of the space, it's all permissionless, right? Now, could that change in the future? Maybe. Would some builders choose to go down that way? Maybe. And I think it's still a bit early to tell what's going to happen.
Before, I just wanted to add, like, follow on that question is, like, before you speak further. So there are a few things which I always see as something which we all should think about is
Mm,
what exactly we are trying to solve here with the DeFi or any such kind of ecosystem. Like, for example, for me, if you ask me today, right, why DeFi? Because it removes the banks intermediation, and that is where. And then again, the second thing is, like, that money can easily be distributed to the people who might be running these digital infrastructure, rather than having like one mediator and piling up the money day by day, like trillions of dollars sitting into that account, and then suddenly those accounts has been given to some a big billionaires, and they are able to utilize that money in. I believe that is where DeFi kind of plays a very vital role. But just to
Mm.
add on that, right? So if we are going to that direction, and we have all seen like how people have been speaking against about KYC, like what do you suggest to coming founders, like when they are building DeFi, they should consider using KYC apps, or they should not?
Well, I might be a little bit biased because we do have some graduates from our accelerator program that are actually solving for, CKDID, and one of the applications would be for anonymous KYC, right? Which I think may be a happy medium, if you will. So something where your privacy is maintained and respected, but at the same time you can still prove some of the requirements that a DeFi protocol might ask, right? Whether it's your residency or your net worth, or could be credit scores, you name it, right? So hopefully there's a happy medium in there, but of course it's a slightly biased answer. The other thing I was going to say, by the way, sorry, and it's just a nuance that I wanted to pick on, which is a bit unrelated to the question, but I think that because when you talk about DeFi and you talk about disintermediating the banks, I would add two nuances to that. I think number one is that I think definitely there is an element around making the financial system more efficient, right? Whether it's around faster settlements, whether it's around removing a lot of the transaction fees, right? Whether it's improving, access to financial services to people who are unbanked or underbanked today. At the same time, I don't know whether this means that the banks will go out of business, or whether it means that they will just need to evolve and adopt potentially a version of some of the technology, right? And so maybe we end up with kind of two systems where one system is sort of the legacy system that adopts some of the technology behind DeFi and some of the use cases, and then you might have other options where are fully, let's call them Web3 native DeFi as we know them today, like Uniswap and Aave and so on. And then people might end up having a choice, right? I think it's early to tell, right? So I think that's one nuance. The second nuance I was going to add as well, going back to disintermediation, and I know that DeFi is easy because it's also very easy to understand for most people who have a bank account. I think what's interesting with Web3 is that, and this is one of the things that drew me to this space, is that I think there's a power to disintermediate so many different industries, right? I mean, you pick something like, for example, NFTs, and suddenly you look at applications around music and you can disintermediate record labels, for example, right? You look at, for instance, decentralized social, right? So the concept behind Lens and a social graph being separated from the various social applications on top, and giving more power to creators versus what you have today with the traditional YouTube and Instagram and TikTok and things like that, right? And I think there's a lot of things that are going to be disintermediated / disrupted. And then I think on top of that, you're going to have a lot of new business models that just purely would not exist without Web3 technology. I mean, one example of that could be things like data DAOs, right? Where you could have marketplaces, decentralized marketplaces with a kind of economic layer as an incentive mechanism to trade data that today is not tradable. And an example of that would be, any kind of scientific data, clinical trial data, all these things that today are very hard to get the appropriate amount of funding because you don't have these markets. And I think Web3 has the power for that. And so I just wanted to share some of those examples. And I know we're going off on a tangent now, but I'm
I
happy to
believe
go back to
no.
the
So I
other
believe
questions.
you have touched base. This was the follow on actually, and I was knowing
Mm,
you might get into that area because most of the startups who has been into the long hash and other places, like they have been into building to that space as well. So that is the reason I wanted to brought this question as well, and which is going to
mm,
interest you a lot. Tech crypto versus money crypto. This topic has been a little bit trendy nowadays into the market. I believe the next set of tone for which is getting set for the next bull cycle is kind of becoming very, very clear where
mm.
exactly their alignment will be. But whatever you have just spoken about, it was around mostly around the tech crypto, right? Where the tech
Yeah.
is going to be around the open internet, open marketplace, open infra marketplace, and all of those things. And that is what we also do at Spheron. Would love to take your take on that. It's like, how do you think in the next bull cycle the narrative for the tech crypto, and I don't know like how is there anyone who is asking these questions publicly? It might be a question like upfront before it goes live also. So what do you think about the tech crypto, right? So is it something which is again a new narrative for the web3 scam, or it is something which is going to be a good for Web3 as such, as total community?
Yeah, and so just to understand the question, so you're asking about more about the technology side, right, of Web3 or crypto, right, versus tokens and
Yeah.
whatnot.
When we say tech crypto, that basically means like, let's say data DAOs, right?
Yeah,
So data DAOs, when you transact over a data DAO, then how exactly the transaction is going to look like? That might possible like
yeah,
data DAO transaction can happen on USDC, USDT, Ethereum, or whatever it is, right?
yeah.
But that is not a DeFi. That is not a banking system. It's more around a
Mm,
tech system which we have built.
yeah.
The same go with the compute, go with any of these layers. So what is your
Mm.
take on those areas? Like, are these tech crypto companies who are getting built, or the tech crypto hype which is getting created in the market, is it going to create an open internet, or it is just going to be like fade away as 2022 DeFi
Yeah.
happened? Like a lot of things happened in the DeFi space.
I think if you look at the history of the crypto space or Web3 space, you had this whole period, I guess, prior to Ethereum, where Bitcoin pretty much dominated the narrative, and it was all around like peer-to-peer payments, right? And then Ethereum came out with smart contracts, and then suddenly you could actually start to build applications on top of it that leverage the technology. I think that DeFi was certainly, I would say, like the breakout technology of smart contracts, and the one that really quickly gained product market fit, where people started to see, okay, now we understand what are some of the things that smart contracts are capable of. And of course, we know that the infrastructure is not there yet, right? I mean, if you look at whatever the fastest blockchain is today, is nowhere near the required TPS to bring it to like mass adoption scale, right? But at least you start to see what are the benefits. And then you had, I guess NFTs was sort of the next one, where I think we moved from very crude JPEGs to membership models, and then some applications, say for example, around, like I mentioned, like music NFTs, other applications, I guess more recently with like non-transferable tokens, for example, like for verified credentials, right? Which is, I mean, I wouldn't say it's been breakthrough yet, but are things that people are working on. And why I wanted to give that as an example was that I think that increasingly we are seeing a number of different technologies emerging that I think could be some of the next breakthrough. Now, I don't know which one is going to be, and I don't know when that breakthrough will happen, but just to name a few, I think one I mentioned earlier, zero knowledge digital identity. Now, why do I think that would be something to get excited about? Is because I think that if we talk to any of our friends, especially outside of Web3, I think most people realize that the privacy has been taken away, right? I mean, Google, Amazon, whoever, I mean, they know everything about us, right? They know who we are, where we work, where we go, they know everything, right? And I think people know this, but today they don't see an alternative to that. And I'm excited about this space because I believe that there will be a future in which I can still be able to prove a lot of things about myself, but without actually revealing these things. And suddenly I'm taking back, my privacy, or at least I might have a choice where I say, hey, I'm willing to give away a certain data about myself, but then in return, either being compensated for it, either monetarily or by getting free access to certain services, right? So that's one area I think is quite interesting. I think there's definitely another area where, and this is definitely a very hot topic right now, I feel, and it'll be this year, which is around account abstraction, right? I think today we see that there's a lot of limiting factors the way the architecture works, particularly on Ethereum, which I would say is probably the chain with most developers. And I think people have started to realize that there's this problem to be solved, which can then create a lot of new use cases that today are not possible, right? I mean, even something as basic as people not having to read through numbers and letters for addresses, or to have to sign a string of transactions 5 times before you get from point A to point B, or introducing gasless transactions for things like, let's say for example, like gaming or things like that, right? Where you don't want to have to pay for gas like every time you do a transaction. Those are just some examples, but I think a lot of these are definitely going to bring a lot of benefit to the broader population, right? Even the non-crypto natives. I also think that folks that are working on cross-chain interoperability are working very interesting problem, because today people in Web3, I mean, we're so deep into the Web3 space, we're always like, oh yeah, okay, it's Ethereum, and then you have your scaling solutions, and you have this type of scaling solution and that type of scaling solution, and then you have your Cosmos ecosystem and the Rust ecosystem and Polkadot and all these kind of things. And the reality is that I think I would draw a parallel to the very early days of the internet, when people were talking about the various standards and protocols that today nobody cares, right? I mean, you talk to the average person, what's HTTP, what is TCP/IP? They don't know and they don't care. And I also see a future, again, I don't know if it'll be 5 or in 10 years or longer, where we've built these amazing Web3 enabled applications, and the average user will not know and will not care where they're built on, what's the technology behind it. All they're going to care is like, hey, this is now doing something that was not possible before, or it's solving a problem that Web2 was not able to solve. And hence, I'm going to use it regardless of how it all works in the background. And so to me, that's what makes it exciting about this space.
If I have to draw a conclusion on your thought now, tech crypto is something which is going to change the industry in this new cycle. That is what I can sense
Absolutely.
from your answer. So coming back to the next and most interesting question, which most of the people love to hear about from you specifically, when it comes to the investment, I do angel investing. It's fine, but I'm not a real investor. For me, investment is like, if the founder is good, I'm in, right? If the founder is not good, if he has an attitude, if he has not a good speaking skills or all of these things, I'm out. Okay, it's a very straightforward for me, right? But when
Yeah.
it comes to the venture investing, which you guys do in your day-to-day activities, and that too in Web3, which is more tougher than in Web2, I would say. The reason being because here there are a lot of scam situation can also happen, and
Yeah.
your reputation is also will be on the stake always, right? Where you cannot go and offer something to the people who are the future scammers, who might convert into future scammers, and there is no legal way to protect yourself.
Yeah.
So in order to like, when you guys start looking into those startups, what are the things you guys look into? Is like, is the team, is the thesis, is the idea, is the product? What are the core areas you emphasize on? So let's say tomorrow, if somebody wants to raise a fund from LongHash, how exactly they should be, what they should be thinking about, what these guys will be looking into?
No, very happy to share this. And I will caveat that I'm going to give the perspective of the LongHash X Accelerator, which is also an investor. The stage is very different to LongHash Ventures, the fund. So maybe let me start with the accelerator, because I think the principles apply, and I will then give a bit of a flavor on the fund side. I think on the accelerator, I mean, we look at generally 5 things. We look at the team, we look at the idea, we'll look at the competitive positioning, the traction, and then whether they've done any prior, kind of fundraise or so, right? I will qualify that a lot of the teams that we come across for the accelerator are very early stage. They tend to be teams that have gone through, let's say, a hackathon program and won a prize. Maybe they have applied for a grant from one of the ecosystems and also won a sizable grant to build something, right? And so they tend to be teams that some of them are not yet full-time in Web3. Some are not. Most of them are not even incorporated. I mean, they're just basically, they've come up with an idea, they're hacking it out, and then they're at the stage where they're like, hey, I've gotten some recognition. Clearly, I'm onto something because I won a hackathon, I won a grant, I'm getting a lot of great feedback. Maybe I'm getting some early, angel interest, right? And so the next step is generally the accelerator. When we look at those 5 dimensions, I would say that the most important one by far is a team. And there's a few reasons for that. Number one is that given how technically complex the Web3 space is, we want to see a strong technical background. Now, it doesn't mean that you need 10, 20 years of experience as a software developer or engineer. But we like to see folks that come from a background having studied computer science, potentially having joined, like a big tech firm as an engineer or developer, or alternatively have been building things in Web2 or Web3 in the past, right? So they already have some kind of track record that shows like that they know what they're doing from a technical aspect, right? So that's one. Ideally, we want to see, if possible, some domain expertise. So for example, if you are solving for credit scoring in Web3, then at least one of the 2 founders should have some kind of knowledge or background in that space, right? Or at least something around, like actuarial science or so, something that gives us the confidence that they understand the problem they're solving. And you can say this about anything, right? You could say about this about music NFTs, you can say it about DeFi, about gaming, etc. And then I think that there's a very important part, which I think it's not maybe very obvious to founders, but there's something that we like to call the receptiveness to feedback. And the reason why it's important, and it's also the reason why the team is the most important part of the criteria, is that generally the teams are at such an early stage that probability or likelihood of pivoting the idea is relatively high compared to, say, a team that already has users and traction and has maybe raised a seed round, right? So the probability is high. And so the point around the openness to feedback is that we also use our knowledge, our experience, and our network to help founders and say, hey, maybe the problem statement is very good. It's a great problem to go after. but maybe the solution, the way that you have it, is not quite right, right? Or maybe in some cases, in some rare cases, we found that the problem statement was maybe not the right one. And so even that had to go and be tweaked. And why we look for founders that are receptive to feedback are those that are at least able to listen to the feedback, consider it, and then have an action plan. And it doesn't mean that you should, pivot every time you get feedback, but at least it means that you consider it and then you decide, like, okay, maybe I decide not to pivot because I realize that, okay, I've taken the feedback, but as a matter of fact, I know it's the right problem. I know I have the right solution for it. Or then you decide, actually this makes sense, and then maybe this is not going to get PMF. Maybe the problem statement is too narrow in scope, whatever it might be, and they pivot, right? So that's one. Team. The second one, I would say, comes in down to the idea. And I think that, first of all, we, regardless of the accelerator fund, we always go for what do we like to call Web3 native ideas or solutions, right? What I mean by that is, are you solving a problem that can only be solved with some kind of Web3 solution, whether it's infrastructure or it's middleware or it's an application? Is it something that you need a blockchain, to solve, or any type of, part of the blockchain stack to solve, right? That's very important because we do come across, what we would qualify as Web 2.0 startups. And there's absolutely nothing wrong to build a Web 2.5 startup. It's just not in the scope of our investment, right? And those include some where, it's basically what we also sometimes call Web 2 with a token. And sometimes I also give very open feedback to the founders and I say, look, you're onto a great idea, but you don't need a blockchain and you don't need a token. Go and build it without it and you'll do well, right? Because not everything needs a token or a blockchain. So that's on the idea. And then the next level of nuance is that for the accelerator itself, I mean, generally, as I mentioned earlier, each cohort will have a theme depending on the ecosystem partners. So for example, when we work with Filecoin, it's all about the need for decentralized storage, whether it's high volume or the criticality of it. When it comes to, say, in the case of Axelar, it's all about cross-chain applications. So we look at, okay, how are you leveraging, let's say, Axelar's general message passing framework to build something that is truly cross-chain, right? And so that's on the accelerator side. And of course, on the fund side, it'll be then making sure that it's aligned to our fund thesis around the points I mentioned earlier. That's on that. I think competitive positioning is quite clear. It's basically like, look, there's a likelihood that whatever you're building, somebody else might be building something similar. Either the problem statement is the same or the solution is similar. And that's okay, right? I think we're so early in this space that one, I don't think we can see in any of these spaces a winner yet because we're so early. And like we see in a lot of other Web2 industries, not everything is a winner take all, right? I mean, you look at the cloud ecosystem, right? I mean, you have Amazon, Google, Microsoft, and you have a lot of smaller ones, and they all thrive in that space. And the same can be about a lot of other verticals. What's important is, one, making sure that the founders are aware that they might have competition. And then what's their value proposition, right? How do they make it different? How is their solution going to be? Will it stand out, from other stuff? And I think the last are pretty self-explanatory. Obviously, traction, we look at, users, partnerships, etc. Again, the fund would look at this in quite a bit of detail. The accelerator generally, because we have teams that are applying very much with like a concept, maybe like an MVP. So, if there's any traction, it's great, but if there's none, it's also okay. And then the fundraising, we also see like, have you won any hackathons? Have you won grants? Do you have some angels? What does that look like? But I would say that one is a smaller part of the whole framework of assessment.
That is quite deep. I believe if any one of the builders will be watching this particular portion of the episode, they should definitely take a deep dive into like whatever you have spoken so far. I have been through multiple things. I have been building this space for long. Like whatever you have spoken, it's to the point, right? It's straight. And I don't know like how many times founders like us, not really like for me, like we also learned it in a very hard way, like it takes time to learn. And that is what I also wanted to add on top of it, is like, see, whatever you have told, everything is good on that. If you put a wrapper and if you wrap it around with the time, then it just plays a very great game there. And that is where we'd love our builders to start building into the Web3 space and keep these points in mind when you are going to LongHash or even any other VCs. I believe they all look at the same criteria, but it is great to hear from you directly, Bury. So coming to our next question, which is, if you're talking about builders, then let's talk about builders a little bit more. Okay. We all have seen how the West has dominated in the case of Web2, right? When even not anymore, I believe nowadays, like most Asian founders, most Indian founders, and all these founders are taking over that. And the SaaS model is kind of killing that industry itself, taking over that with a heavy wave. So my intent is not to like ask this question to ask like they are not yet any more talented and all the talents are shifting here. It's not like that. It's just like how we see the shift happening, because the composability in the Web 3.0 has brought really a great experience to the into the industry, right? Where earlier Web 2 did not had that composability. Let's say even though if I had to let's say build on Facebook, I had to use their APIs, and I don't know like when they are going to ban it. And I never had an even today also, right? So when I'm speaking to you, one of the subdomains got blocked, and now I need to reach out to Chrome. I don't even know how exactly how to reach out to them, and we don't even have a clue. If the more of these products become closer to the native audiences, which is like local audiences, then solving such business issues become much more faster. What do you think that shift is going to make happen into the industry? Is it going to be driven from the West again, or that shift is already started seeing and reflecting into the other market as well, specifically talking about India?
No, I think I actually have a lot of observations from what we've seen in India in the past 12, 18 months, right? I think that you made a lot of good points, right? I think one is that Web3, there's a lot of elements around Web3, which I think also, and I hate this word, but it almost democratizes or let's say levels the playing field for builders around the world to build. There's a few reasons I think for it. I think some are very banal but important, and then there's others that have strong nuance. I think one is that, compared to almost every other industry, I think Web3 was already, from a kind of physical office location, already fairly different to the rest of the world, right? People were already kind of working remote and distributed or decentralized, as teams. I think COVID definitely accelerated that. I mean, we have had some projects that came through the accelerator where the founders had never met in person. I mean, they had a lot of Zoom calls, but because of all the travel restrictions, they had never met. I think that's something that's very unique to Web3. So I think that's one where it was accelerated by COVID. And we see today, right? We come across a lot of founders who today are joining a call from India, tomorrow from Europe, the day after from Costa Rica, then from wherever. And I think it's just that flexibility. I mean, in part, it's also probably to a certain extent facilitated by crypto itself as a medium of transfer of value, right? I think that's one. I think the second one, as you rightly mentioned, there's the element around composability and permissionless, right? So for example, if you have a great idea that's building on top a DeFi primitive or something like Lens, or I mean, even something from scratch that you're building on any chain, the fact that it's permissionless and composable means that you don't need to go and call, someone at Ethereum or Aave or wherever and say, hey, I want to build something or give me access to the APIs or something like that, right? You just do it, right? You just sit on your computer and you just do it, right? I think the third one, which is interesting, is the borderless nature of crypto and the Web3 space, also means that you don't have to be physically in, let's say, the US, for example, to tap US users, or you could say the same for India and China, given they're the two largest countries in the world. You can be anywhere, actually. You could be in South America, Africa, it doesn't matter, but you could actually build something for 8 billion people rather than build something for your local catchment area. And I think that's also something that has enabled, or that has leveled the playing field for a lot of developers, where perhaps 10, 20, 30 years ago, they'd be like, I need to be in Silicon Valley to access the users, right? And let alone talent and capital, right? Whereas now it's like, yeah, I just deploy my application on Ethereum and people anywhere can access it, right? So I think that's made things quite different. I will come back to the question around the West and the East, or the West and the rest of the world in a minute, but I did want to touch on India. I think that we've gone from 2 years ago. I mean, definitely there were a lot of Indian builders, but at least within Asia, I wouldn't say they were the majority. Amazingly, in the last 12 to 18 months or so, we've seen a huge wave of developers coming from India, and very high caliber developers. And I think that India is very uniquely positioned in the sense that you have, first of all, amazing technical talent coming from BITS, the IITs, all these amazing engineering colleges in India, right? So very well trained. At the same time, a lot of them also having experiences with big tech, right? So working and building within the big tech space, right? So I think the technical capability is amazing, right? And it's also like a bit of the power of numbers, that there's a lot of great technical talent coming from India. I think that's one. I think the second one is that, in my experience, and I mean, I used to go to India a little bit when I was a consultant, and I haven't been in a while, but my impression from going there and from a lot of Indian colleagues I used to have in Southeast Asia is that people are very hungry, right? They're very hungry to make it and to build great things, right? And I think the third one is that there's also a lot of inspirational homegrown leaders. I think, of course, Polygon is the best example, but there's folks like CoinShift, there's quite a few projects there that I think have gained a lot of notoriety among both the existing Web3 community, but also those who aspire to enter the space, right? And I think these three make it a very exciting space. I mean, we actually, despite us always hiring the best talent we consciously hired a couple of colleagues in India because we wanted to make sure we had people there on the ground that can be, close to the builders and, meeting the builders, speaking to them, understanding what they're building, understanding what the needs are, because we see it as a very important place, right? Both in terms of the development and of course, I think if you're an Indian developer, the nice thing is that you have a huge market to tap into before you even decide to, let's say, go outside, although that's a very Web2 mentality. I think to your point about the East and the West, it's a little bit hard to say. I actually ask this question a lot to people, right? Especially people that are based in the US. I ask them, like, what's Silicon Valley like now, in the Web3 space? Or how does it compare to, first of all, other parts of the US that are emerging as tech hubs like, New York or Austin or Miami? And how does it compare to other parts? I think generally people echo what I was saying earlier, that the field has been leveled. Anyway, sorry. But because now it makes it easier for a developer anywhere to build and get users, right? How things will shift, I think it remains to be seen. I mean, obviously, like I said, India has a lot of benefits. I think the US still has a lot of benefits. I mean, you definitely have a legacy of, entrepreneurs and startups and capital and research universities, right? And I don't think that strength will go away anytime soon. But I think if anything, for those of us who are strong believers in the space, the good thing is that it just makes it easier for anyone to build. And it just means that there'll be, I think, a faster growth of developers in the Web3 space, regardless of where they are.
Awesome. I believe you covered most of the point, right? So, and I love the idea, like how exactly we have spoken about diplomatically not comparing both the things, but making sure like making sure like the fields are level up, and now it's on everyone to go ahead. And but just to keep the few things very straight, right, which we Indian face as in day-to-day life, we have born and brought up in a very different culture and different environment where we don't come and speak in the same way as it has to. Like I believe you might have already seen most of the founders in the space who are coming from India. The biggest challenge which they face is the challenge of speaking out themselves. Okay. When I say that, it is also applicable to me as well. So I became so much extrovert, like after getting into the Web3. Before that, I was not. The reason being because we always fear about the community, like what they are going to think about us. But that is what is changing in Web3. If person like me can change and become the part in the Web3 and prove my position to this space, then anyone can do. And that is what I always call about the Web3. Is like that is something which is going to change. It doesn't matter if you're in East or West. Doesn't matter. It's now the fields are leveled up. It's up to you how soon you start speaking, how soon you start showing your talent up, and the world is all yours. Not anymore local. So in our India, there was a term which our prime minister have taken called like build from local, go global. That term basically like resonates very well with the Web3, and I'd love to see like when India decides to go more global in the Web3 and the blockchain space as such.
I understand. And I think that there's a lot of other cultures, mostly in Asia, that I think would say that, yes, that totally resonates with, my culture. And I think the one nice thing about Web3 as a culture, more than anything, is that I think generally it's a very welcoming environment. I think most people are probably under 30. It's a very energetic space.
So thank you so much. I believe, as you have rightly mentioned, like one of the best thing about Web3 is like how welcoming we are. It doesn't matter where we are sitting. It only matters like, are you comfortable in coming to the Web3 or not? So this is what builders have to start asking questions to themselves. And if you have found that answer yes, then come and ping us. We'll be more than happy to like support you wherever it is possible and join various communities out there, which is very open source and welcoming as well. Following up with that question, this is my final question to you, right? If you have to sum up about the Web3, like about being a founder into the space, being someone who want to come over into the Web3 and want to start building, what should be their starting point? What are the things they should care about the most? And then what are the few key elements which they should think about before even entering Web3?
I think two things to care about the most. I would say community and technology. And so what I mean by that is, I think one of the also very unique things about Web3 is that, by the way, this is for technical builders and non-technical builders, meaning that those who might not know how to code but still want to get into the spaces, join the community. And of course, that means many different things. It means go to events, join Discord servers, join Telegram groups, right? It's completely free and start to get to know people, right? It really like put yourself out there. I love it when I meet people at some of these events and they're like, hey, I'm new. I want to learn. I want to see how I can get involved. That's exactly how you got to do it, right? The two things to keep in mind, one, we're very early. There's a lot of stuff we haven't seen. And I'm very sure that 10 years from now, we're going to look back at the existing, DeFi applications, NFT applications. We're going to think, wow, that was very, very rudimentary. And now we have all these nice, shiny things, right? I think there's a massive paradigm shift across all these dimensions, right? I think that's one. The second one, going to a hackathon, going to a VC, going to an accelerator, just be very clear and simple in the message, right?
Both of the 2 points you touched base very right here, right? And that is where one of the reasons of the second reason which you have pointed out is to open this channel for ourselves. The proof of builders, which we are calling it, is to basically communicate the same thing to the people, is to be simple, be straightforward. You don't have to, even in our entire call, we did not use a single consensus mechanism to explain anything, right?
Yes.
It was and it was very straightforward, right? So everything can be solved in a very much more easier way. And I would also like to add one more point on top of it as a flavor of it to make it more crispy, is if you're building into the Web3, build for Web3, don't build for Web2. When I say that, and I have heard it, correct me if I'm wrong also Bury, on this, there are a lot of times when at Spheron we hear people calling us like AWS for Web3. And we go back and tell them, hey, you know what? We are not AWS for Web3. We are Spheron for Web3. So start calling yourself and start believing in what you guys are building, because these two worlds are totally parallel worlds, which means like in a world A and world B, there is nothing which is going to coexist. They will exist. If you come here, you will find something else, but you cannot compare itself. And that is what the narrative I try to find it out. And the second narrative is around like in 2002 or 2000, prior to AWS, cloud was even there. Did anyone imagine or what they were able to compare cloud was? Was there anything to compare with? No. But why we are comparing it then today, right? Because it's totally a different parallel, different ocean market, like different ocean strategy market where everything is unexplored and we all are exploring. So just keep these points also in mind. It was fabulous and fantastic session, Bury.
Thank you so much for having me. No, it was a great pleasure to be invited to this. So thank you so much.